So next punta naman tayo sa second type of risk is what we call here the technological and information technology risk or the IT risk, no. So when we talk about this type of risk, it talks about risk relating to conditions where information technology is not operating as intended. We also talk about here the integrity and reliability of data being compromised and significant assets are exposed to potential loss or misuse. We're talking about here the IT assets. It also relates to the inability to maintain critical systems and processes. So we talk about also the kind of systems that has that is being critical to the operations or to the production process of the organization. Okay? So, if the following risk falls under uh, this mentioned items, definitely talks about technological and IT risk. So, ano ba yung mga um, examples ng mga risk that would fall under this one, no? So for the first one, we talk about the data and systems availability risk. It is the uptime of systems, machines, and other tools to support the needs of workers, customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders of the organization. This involves data acquisition, maintenance, use, distribution, storage, and destruction. So it talks about the availability of the data and system. So if ever no may problem as to the availability of the data in the needs of the said or the said aforementioned parties, then definitely ito yon, data and system availability risk. Okay, now we go to the second one, which we call data integrity risk. It talks about the accuracy and consistency of data stored, no? Processed, retrieved, and destroyed when it reaches the end of its life cycle. So it talks about the data integrity risk, no. So kung siya ay in terms of consistency of data until it reaches end of life cycle, most likely dapat uh, walang nagbago as to how it is being stored, processed, retrieved, and even until its eventual disposal. So, if that is the case, then uh, we have data integrity. Otherwise, if wala, no, walang consistency and hindi siya accurate, meaning not free from error, then yun yung risk of having the data with no integrity. Okay. Next, we also have here the system capacity risk, no, wherein we are talking about optimizing the amount of storage and computing ability systems possess. Okay? So, if ever we weren't able to really not optimize well the capacity of the system, so there is a problem with regard to the use of the storage and the computing ability of the system, most likely it will fall under this kind of risk. So, for the next remaining items such as yung data integrity, infrastructure risk, commerce risk, access risk and availability risk, we have already mentioned it a while ago under also of the business and the process risk. Okay, so ito in terms of the technological and information technology risk, no, same naman siya ng tawag dito na explanation as what we have mentioned earlier. Okay, so now we go to the third type of risk, what we call the personal risk. It talks about or it is relating to the conditions that limit the organization's ability to obtain, deploy, and retain enough suitably qualified and motivated workers. So it talks about the process of getting the people or hiring the people and retaining the people, no, of the organization. as organizations increasingly rely on their workforce to produce goods and services that add value to their customers, management is confronted with the risk that personnel shortages would limit their ability to deliver consistently with high quality in the short and long terms eventually. Okay? So, yun nga, um, tawag ito, it talks about yung people na talagang as human capital in providing their expertise, knowledge, and skills that will help in achieving the organization's objectives. So in this scenario, no, yung in order for them to produce the goods and services that would really add value to their customer. So kailangan I mean, of course, there is a risk in terms of the supply of people that would give uh, quality service to the customers. Okay? So, what are the risks that would fall under this personal risk? So, first is what we call availability risk. So, it talks about sufficient workers and subject matter expert or SMEs to support the organization's present and future needs. So, it talks about the quantity, no, of people that would be enough or sufficient enough to meet the current and the future demands of the organization. Okay? Kasi if there's no sufficient workers that would really support the needs, then definitely there's an availability risk, no? Now we go to the competence risk. So it talks about the worker's ability to perform duties efficiently and successfully, no? Of course, if the workers are competent enough, meaning they have this um, qualifications, no, in discharging their duties efficiently and successfully, then there's no problem in terms ng pag provide nila ng or pag-perform nila ng trabaho nila, no? Pero if there is a problem with regard to their ability to perform their job, no, in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, then yun nga, dahil nga hindi sila qualified, then there is a competence risk. Okay, so next is the judgment risk. So when you say judgment risk, it talks about the worker's capacity, no, to make sensible decisions based on relevant circumstances. So it talks about yung kanilang way of seeing things, no, on how would they judge a certain scenario and how would they decide on that, no, that is relevant to the said scenario, no. If may problem with regard to making any decisions, no, then there is a judgment risk, no. Okay, then next we have here the malfeasance risk, meaning I mean malfeasance risk meaning it is a wrongdoing perpetrated by employees, contractors, suppliers, or customers. Okay. So next we go to the motivation risk. So in here, the motivated workers fail to apply creativity and discipline to their task, resulting in lower production, lower quality, poor service, and high turnover and absenteeism. So if there is a problem with regard to really motivating the people, then we have here what we call motivation risk. So mga demotivated people to or worker who will if in case, no, walang nagawang way to really give them inspiration or motivation nga, it will result in problems, so like low quality, no, yung mga na-mention natin kanina. Okay, then next type of risk is what we call the financial risk. Financial risk here means it can result in poor cash flows, currency, and interest rate fluctuations, and an inability to move funds quickly and without loss of value to where they are needed. So, kung nag-fall under itong mga to dito, then definitely it is a financial risk. So ano yung mga um, individual risk that would fall under financial risk? So we have here the resource risk. When we talk about resource risk, no, sorry for that, it is the availability of funds when needed and their judicious use for business purposes. No, in terms of in availability, no, kung may problem tayo with regard to its availability, no, and kung walang proper way to use the funding for its legit purpose, no, in the business use, no, it's a resource risk. Okay, so next we have the commodity price risk, which talks about fluctuations in prices exposing the organization to lower margins or trading losses. So yun yung problem natin, no? If there is a fluctuation or volatility in terms of the pricing of commodities being used by the organization, lalo na kung mga raw materials, no? If ever, no, kung meron ng fluctuation, no, may exposure to having the organization in earning lower profit, no, or possibly, no, kung sobrang mahal ng mga items, losses pa. Okay, or trading losses. Okay, then next we have here the foreign currency risk, which pertains to changes in foreign exchange rates, which can result in the economic loss of some of the value of the asset, no. This holds true lalo na kapag kunwari um, yung ating in case, no, liability in the first place, no, wherein yung ating currency in paying the amount is in terms of dollar, and kung yung dollar ay depreciating, so meaning tumataas yung exchange rate, and that would result in a foreign currency loss. So yung example natin ng foreign currency risk, no. If ever naman sa part to ng receivable, no, kung may receivable tayo sa customer, kung appreciating naman yung ating tawag dito, yung ating exchange rate, meaning bumababa, so yung payment sa atin naman, no, kung pababa yung value ng peso versus the dollar, then at a loss din tayo, no, in case. Okay? So next we also have here the liquidity risk. Now, when we say liquidity risk, this is the loss exposure due to an inability to meet the cash flow obligations or lack of buyers and sellers in a market, or the illiquid market, no. Ang pwede nating sabihin dito is kunwari we don't have enough current asset for us to satisfy the current liability or obligation, then that is liquidity risk. Of course, kung sa market naman, kung kulang tayo ng buyers and sellers, no, how would we be able to realize some of our current asset in case na, kunwari, we need to sell this item. So, there's a problem in terms of liquidity, no, sa part ng organization. Then we also have here the last one pertaining to market risk. When you say market risk, these are movements in prices, rates, and indices affecting the value of the organization financial assets and stock price. This could also affect its cost of capital and its ability to raise capital. So kung meron lang problem with regard to movement in the prices of the stock of the organization, lalo kung siya ay fluctuating or volatile din, so most likely it will have an effect to the value doon sa stock price ng organization. Okay, so kung pababa yung value ng ating stock price, then it will be very detrimental to the organization. Ngayon, kung pataas yung stock price, then wala tayong magiging problem. Ang problem natin yung pababa yung value ng stock price, right? So, yun, it's a market risk. Okay? Lalo na kung ang maraming willing na buyer or seller of the stocks na mapababa yung kanilang benta sa presyo ng shares ng organization, no? Yun, it's also a market risk. Okay? Then we go now to the environment risk, no? When we talk about risk, no, it relates to the actual or potential threat of negative effects on the environment by emission, waste, and resource depletion. So more of parang negative effects of using the environmental resources that we have. Okay? So this can be caused by organization activities lalo kung sila ay heavy user of the natural resources. And of course, if that's the case, it can influence living organisms, land, air, and water. So what are the risks that would fall under the environmental risk? So we have here yung what we call energy and other resources risk, which talks about inability to obtain reliable supplies at a reasonable price. So remember the law of supply and demand, no? Kung kumukonti yung ating supply, so most likely tumataas yung price natin kasi nga kulang yung ating source, 'di ba? And lalo na kung mataas yung demand, so most likely talagang tataas yung presyo. So that is the energy and other resources risk. So, and then we also have here the natural disaster risk, which talks about events such as floods, earthquakes, fires, hurricanes, and tornadoes. Also, the lack of potable water and other resources needed in the company facility. So, it's more of, yun nga, dahil nga may nangyari mga man-made disasters, and yun, it's a risk that would fall under this environment risk, which we call natural disaster. And kasama nga dito yung kunwari, kulang tayo ng potable water, meaning potable water, drinkable water, no, na kailangan actually ng mga tao and even the organization, no, that would fall under again this type of risk. And then we also have here the pollution risk, which talks about regulations and stakeholder demands affecting the source of energy supplies and the quantity and the manner of waste allowable. Also, excessive pollution that limit the organization's employees' health and safety. These activities can be harmful to the environment and expose the organization to liabilities for bodily injury, property damage, removal cost, and punitive damage, among others. Okay, so any harmful substance that can affect the environment, so like waste, no, pwedeng air pollution, no, definitely mapupunta yan dito. That would also have a detriment or negative or adverse effect to the health and safety of the employees. Dito rin yan. Okay? Then we have here the transportation risk, which talks about ensuring the availability of adequate means of transportation. Some depend on natural means such as navigable rivers, lakes, and coastlines, or are directly or indirectly affected by natural or human actions such as having unobstructed roads and working railroads. Okay. So next we also have the pandemic risk. So very timely, no? When you say pandemic risk, these are bacteria or viruses that disrupt the organization's supply chain or availability of its workforce to perform its duty. So most likely present tong pandemic risk lalo na sa panahon natin ngayon na wherein COVID-19 is very very ano ba? Um I mean causing a lot of difficulty in the economy na meron tayo ngayon, 'di ba? So 'yun. And next we also have here, no, the political risk, which talks about a type of risk, no, which is faced by organization, investors, and governments. It refers to the effects that political decisions, events, or conditions can cause when they affect the profitability of a business or the ability to operate freely. It has to do with the complications organizations may encounter as a result of political decision. So most likely it talks about politics, no? So it can refer also to, so in here, it's an example would be, for example, enacting a law, no, na possibly there's an effect to the way the operation of the organization would be affected, no? Kunwari, ang pwede nating example dito is, of course, yung kay ABS-CBN, di ba? So, yung the renewal of the franchise. So, non-renewal of the franchise. Dahil doon, no, nagkaroon tuloy ng adverse effecto sa operations ng company ni ABS, di ba? So, it really affected their profitability, no? So, instead of having their channels to be aired on a free channel, they instead look for another or alternative ways for them to really broadcast their content, no, through digital means, or buying some airtime slots, no, from different TVs such as tawag dito yung A to Z, no, and TV5, no. So yun yung mga example natin ng political risk, no. So what are the specific examples, no? So in here we have the regulation and legislation risk, which talks about the new or changes to existing regulation that limit the organization's ability to engage in its normal business activity. So it's possible yun nga yung non-renewal of the franchise, yun yung pwede nating lagay ditong regulation and legislation risk. Possible then yung changing of the form of government, di ba? There is a bill seeking to change the tawag dito, the government to federalism, 'di ba? So, eto kung sakaling ma-approve yung bill, no? Hindi naman ako I'm neutral, I'm not political here, no. Ano lang 'yan ha, caveat, no. So, kapag ganun, no, there possibly, no, there would be an effect on how the organization would operate definitely. Okay. So next would be public policy risk, which talks about again the stakeholders' demands affecting the organization's operation. Okay. So, and we have also here the instability risk, which talks about the civil or military unrest that disrupts the organization activity. So example natin dito yung Marawi siege, no. Of course, it really have an effect, no, to the operations, no, ng mga some of the businesses in the said city, no. So yun, may ganung effect din yun. Okay. So next will be the social risk, no. I think this is the last type of risk, no, which talks about relating to dynamics where an issue affects stakeholders who can form negative perceptions that can cause some form of damage to the organization. It can be influenced by strategic and operational decisions management makes that affect issues stakeholders care about. In here, the way society perceives organizations' way of conducting business is becoming increasingly important and drives decisions related to climate change, obesity, workers' rights, poverty, and other social and environmental issues. Current and prospective customers are increasingly responding to these dynamics by buying, commenting publicly through social media, or by lobbying with power brokers to exert pressure on organization to behave in ways that reflect their wishes. Social risk is also influenced by societal dynamics affecting the workplace and target customers such as their age, racial composition, national origin, and family structure decisions. And we also identified for subcategories of social risk. So for the first one, we talk about demographics risk. When you say demographics risk, these are changes that affect purchasing preferences, staff availability, or the cost to maintain a healthy workforce. So if there's any changes in terms of the demographics, let's say as to the preferences of the customer or even the profile or demographic profile of the customer, definitely it will have an effect on the operations also of the organization. Okay, so next we also have here the privacy risk, which pertains to preferences that curtail the capture, storage, use, and dissemination of personal information. So remember that the information that we obtain from the customer, as much as possible, no, these are, of course, in nature too personal. No, we want to keep that information, and if we divulge this information or we did not comply with the confidentiality rule, no, or principle, most likely it will have a negative effect on the in the reputation of the organization. Okay. So we also have here the CSR, or the corporate social responsibility risk, which talks about the requirements for social involvement and investment that diverts time and other resources from the organization primary activity. So actually this is a common activity, no, yung mga CSR or sustainability activity, particularly on big organizations. Of course, if they have this kind of activity, they would, I mean, the public would normally, I mean, would see this organization helping the community in a way, no? So that will bring a good, or a good public image, no, for the organization, no? And that's a good start, no? Ito yung medyo hindi rin okay in a way, kasi some of the organization take for granted the CSR sustainability report, that sometimes parang tinatakpan minsan yung mga primary activity nila, which would have a negative effect on the some of the factors na or aspects sa society. Let's say for example, no, may mga organization, no, para hindi masyadong mapansin yung mga activity nila in depleting the natural resources, they also um, in a way, no, in-engage nila yung sarili nila sa mga CSR or sustainability activity, na tipong kahit may gawin sila na pagre-restore ng mga use of natural resources, it's not enough, no? So, yeah, medyo I mean, ang point ko lang dito na medyo na ano siya, na nagagamit na, or nati-take for granted, or in a way nagagamit ng hindi tama, no? So, sige. Next is what we call mobility risk. So it talks about dynamics that change the preferences of workers and customers to work and live in ways that support the organization's needs and products. This assessment requires management to consider the impact of possible changes in the external environment and within their own business model that could make internal control ineffective. This includes focusing on clearly articulating objectives relating to operations, reporting, and compliance, so any risk to these objectives can be identified and assessed. Also take into consideration the need to assess the suitability of objectives to assess effectiveness, no? Of course, we need to check kung talaga bang suitable yung objectives natin to in assessing the effectiveness of the operations. Effectiveness relates to the achievement of objectives and the degree to which these are achieved, no? In what, I mean, what degree, no, or in terms of quantifying this item, no? Parang in terms of what percentage, no? Pwedeng ganon. Okay? So, now that we have discussed the different 7 types of risk, no? What is the effect of this risk, no? If ever ma-realize yung bad event na would eventually happen, no? One is number one to, loss of assets, no? Lalo na kung hindi properly na for example, no, na safeguard, no, hindi na properly hedge, no. So yun, it's one of the possible effect of risk. Number two, no, negative publicity, or the good image of the organization, no. Medyo hindi na siya maganda, no. Kumbaga at stake yung kanilang reputation, lalo na if they are engaged in an activity na lalong hindi naging maganda impression sa kanila ng public. Okay? One example also, yung parang non-compliance with the laws and regulation. Of course, no? Kung sino ba naman yung gusto na parang yung company hindi sumusunod sa batas at sa regulation na mandato na wherein nasasakop sila doon. Okay? Of course, effect of risk is also erroneous decision. Okay, so isa rin yun. And of course, number 4, customer dissatisfaction. Okay, so kung may mga risk na nangyari, no, na realize, no, of course, pwede natin relate to sa negative publicity, no, may reputation na rin talaga sila. And one more, yung paggamit ng product would not really be good up to its promise, no. There would be also customers dissatisfaction, no. And next, we also have fraudulent financial and operational reporting. Lalo na kung walang controls over financial reporting. Definitely, kung walang control, then some of the stakeholders who will be using the information stated in the financial and operational reporting, lalo na kung medyo fraudulent to, no, I mean, their decision that they will be making will not be sound, no? Kasi nga, they base their decision based on this fraudulent financial or operational reporting. Next effect is erroneous record keeping and accounting, lalo na if there is a wrong application of the standard, no? And lalo na kung medyo hindi maganda yung document flow, no, ng tawag dito ng transaction, no, and wala kunwari tayong way on supervising the work of the preparer of the document, do. So ito effect din to ng risk na yon, no. Also, non-compliance with rules and regulations. So, ito yung mahirap, no? Kasi ito yung parang marami ng mangyayari or domino effect kung may non-compliance with rules and regulation tayo, no? It will have a negative publicity, no? So, we talk about reputation. No? Next, we also have purchase of resources uneconomically, meaning kung there's no control, no, lalo na kung kasi in terms of in the purchasing department, no, medyo mataas talaga yung risk dyan if hindi sila controlled or walang proper safeguard, no. It's possible that the protocol of choosing the highest bidder will not be followed, no. Possible may mga mabili tayong mamahaling mga raw materials, no, hindi na consider yung cost efficiency. Okay, so the last one here is the failure to accomplish the established goal. So most likely yun nga yung magiging problem natin, no. If we let the bad event to happen without any controls in place that would help us to achieve the objectives of the organization, it will not really help us and it will result to failure in accomplishing the established goals that is aligned with the objectives. Okay, so that are the effects of the risk. Okay, so now we go to the ERM, or what we call the enterprise risk management, no. According to COSO, ERM, or the enterprise risk management, is a process affected by whom? The entity's board of directors, not only the board of directors, but also the management and other personnel, applied in strategy setting and across the enterprise. So, meaning, not only on a certain department, division, or unit, it is across the organization or the whole enterprise. That is designed to identify the potential events that may affect the entity that we need to manage is to be within its risk appetite and to provide. So remember, to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of the entity's objective. So that is the definition of ERM to COSO. So this ERM framework is geared to achieving an entity's objectives set forth in four categories. So we have four. So one is strategic objective, which pertains to high-level goals aligned with and supporting its mission. Then fourth is the operations, which wherein we are talking about effective and efficient use of its resources, no. And for the third one, we are talking about reporting, the reliability of reporting. It can be financial and operational. And lastly, the compliance objective, which talks about self-explanatory, no, compliance with applicable laws and regulation. And under the ERM, we have five risk components, no, coming from the COSO exposure draft. So we have here the risk governance and culture. We have the risk strategy and objective setting. Then we also have here the risk in execution. Then we have here the risk information communication and reporting. And lastly, we talk about monitoring enterprise risk management performance. So, dito, no, kung meron tayong components of internal control, ngayon naman, meron din tayo namang components for risk, no, under the COSO exposure data. So, first, we discuss yung risk governance and culture. So, parang ito yung control environment. When we say risk governance and culture, um, both this together form a basis for all other components of the ERM or the enterprise risk management. In here, risk governance sets the entity tone or ano ba yung attitude, no, ng board of directors and the management to the organization, reinforcing the importance of and establishing the oversight responsibilities for the ERM. So in your culture pertains to the ethical values, desired behaviors, and understanding of risk in the entity. Culture is reflected definitely in the decision making. So most likely parang ito yung control environment na counterpart doon sa internal control system. Okay? So next is the risk, strategy, and objective setting. So, ERM is integrated into the entity's strategic plan through the process of setting the strategy and business objective. With an understanding of business context, the organization can gain insight into internal and external factors and their impact on risk. An organization sets its risk appetite in conjunction with strategy setting. So, kung medyo aggressive in terms of strategy ang organization, you would expect that the risk appetite of the entity or the organization will be definitely high. Okay? The business objectives allow strategy to put into practice and shape the entity's day-to-day operations and priorities. So remember na self-explanatory rin naman ito, no. Most likely kung ano yung business objectives. So that's how it will that's the starting point of ano ba yung magiging direction of the organization or ng operations, and paano yung magiging day-to-day operations ng organization, no, kasi nga through the objective that we set, no, or the objective set by the organization, ano ba yung mga strategy, and that is we now translate those strategy into day-to-day operations or yung mga kailangan gawin ng line, down under the middle management or ng operations management para makatulong doon sa ating pag-realize ng ating objective or ng goal. Okay? So next we have here the risk in execution. An organization identifies and assesses risk that may affect an entity's ability to achieve its strategy and business objective. So, just like with the risk assessment, no, we need to identify the risk, no, that would be a hinder in achieving our strategy or doing the strategy and achieving the business objectives. It prioritizes risk according to their severity and considering the entity's risk appetite. So meaning, kung mataas yung kanyang risk score or mataas yung kanyang risk, high risk siya. So most likely din yung ipaprioritize na risk ng organization. The organization then selects the risk response. No, it's possible it could be we accept, we mitigate, no. Later on, no, may discussion tayo kung ano yung mga different kinds of risk responses, and monitors the performance for the change. In this way, it develops a portfolio view of the amount of risk the entity has assumed in the pursuit of its strategy and business objective. So in case ang organization ay may mga activity na may mga high risk and they accept the risk, no, or they done some of the responses to those risks, and still um, I mean, kung siya ay within the appetite, no? Of course, titingnan din naman yung ano, no, in case if they will be assessing also if kung within the risk appetite would some of the activity na currently meron ng organization, kapag mamaya pag pinagsama-sama, would that change the decision? Kasi baka mamaya isang area lang yung tinitingnan natin, no, isang silo lang, pero kapag tinignan natin yung other areas of the organization, medyo baka need i-reconsider, baka kasi I mean yung risk, no, kapag in-aggregate mo beyond the risk appetite, no? So, yun, need i-consider din yun. No? Kasi baka mamaya maganda nga yung strategy and ating yung business objective, pero if we further assume it, no, or we let it go, no, na I mean mangyari, no, baka mamaya in the future, no, baka mataas ang exposure natin doon sa risk na yun, and it will have a catastrophic impact, no, to the operations ng ating business. Okay, so yun yung mga need to consider in the risk in execution. So next is risk information, communication and reporting, no. So parang ito yung tawag dito, yung ating information system and communication. So linear communication is the continual iterative process of obtaining information and sharing it throughout the entity. Management uses relevant and quality information from both the internal and external sources to support the enterprise risk management. The organization leverages these information systems to capture, process, and manage data information. By using the information that applies to all the components, the organization then definitely reports on the risk, the culture, and the performance. So, same concept din ng ano ng information system and communication. Okay? So you see the importance of the risk information, no, and at all levels of the management. At the same time, how would you communicate this information to all levels of the organization also? Okay, so the last one, monitoring the enterprise risk management performance, just like with the monitoring of the internal control system. So in the context of the risk component, no, or the risk, no, by monitoring enterprise risk management performance, an organization can consider how well the ERM components are functioning over time and considering substantial changes. Okay? So, parang same na same lang din talaga doon sa ating discussion ng internal control components. Okay? Next, we have the risk management process. So, ito yung dito natin i-discuss yung mga sinasabi nating how would you identify the risk, how would you assess and analyze the risk, you then provide the risk response, and how would we monitor and mitigate the risk, no, kung meron mga ma-realize na risk, no. Okay, so for the first one, no, we have here the risk identification. Okay. When you say risk identification, no, this takes a form of list of risk. So what we call the risk universe, no. It's possible na may identified risk na tayo doon sa risk universe, or pwede rin naman templated siya na ano yung mga possible risk na available in this certain kind of organization within that industry. So pwedeng may ganun tayong list of risk. Okay? So, quite often this step is not exhaustive enough or performed by individuals with limited knowledge of the process being assessed. So, baka mamaya kasi we have a complete list, pero may mga emerging risks o yung mga risk na hindi natin nakita in the first place, no? Kaya nga hindi natin sinasabing exhaustive tong list of risks na to. So, that's why, as a result, only some of the relevant risks are identified. Okay? Okay, in here, this creates several limitations. The first and most important is that the fact that all other actions related to the risk assessment will be limited as well. If a risk has not been identified, it will be not measured or analyzed either. So, So, what are the activities that can we do no to identify risk? So, some of the activities are as follows. No, so one is expert interviews with the management personnel. Of course, if you will have an interview with the management personnel as to the nature, no, as to the process of the operations or some of the policy and procedures, no, you would have an idea, no, what are the possible risks, no, or they might probably give you an idea, no, kung ano yung mga current na event or risk na present, no, doon sa galaw ng organization. Also, we have risk assessment meetings, no, together with some of the key people, no, in the risk management process, no, we can identify some of the risk, no. Number three, review of previous risk assessment working papers by the internal audit department, no. It will give us also a list of risk. Okay, and another would be uh, filling the detailed questionnaires for adequate existence of internal control. In here, ensuring the appropriateness of these questionnaires in alignment with the operations of the company. So, through the internal controls, no, na questionnaire, we can identify some of the risks that is present or the risks that are currently present. Then, no, and the next would be carefully reviewing the results of the internal audit questionnaires and making red flags where serious control violations are found. So, yun yung sinasabi natin kanina, no? Kung may mga internal control violations or weakness, then it's possible there is a risk, no? Then next, we have reviewing management working papers for risk assessments made by them. So, aside from the risk assessment that the auditor does, no, the management also have the risk assessment. So from their assessment we can draw some risk, no, na possibly present, no, doon sa organization. And another source will be reviewing system descriptions available from management and from available manuals for operations, financial controls and accounting, and noting down weak controls or absence of controls from this document. So, it's possible na maging source din natin mga documents such as flowcharts, policies and procedures, no, and some of the accounting policy and procedures. From those, we can identify risk. No, in general, when discussing risk with operations management, the following are some of the useful questions. So, nasa libro to ha. So, the first question, what would constitute failure and how do you look for its indicators? Okay. So next, are there any liquid assets such as cash that are susceptible to loss? Another question would be, what assets needs to be protected, including PII or the personally identifiable information. Next question, what must go right for this operation to succeed? The next question, how do we know whether the process is achieving its objective? Another question, where are the people, process, systems, and assets vulnerable? Okay, another, on what information do you rely the most? Okay, another, what item constitute the largest expenditures? What activities are the most complex? What activities are regulated and where is the greatest legal exposure? And lastly, what decisions require the most judgment? No? So actually from these questions, you will know what risk are currently in present, no, if you will try to answer this question through the information that you'll be getting from the management and some of the documents presently in that are available, no. Okay, the next process is what we call the risk qualification and prioritization. So in here, once the risks are identified, it is important to determine the probability of the said risk from happening and its impact, of each risk on efficient and effective conduct of the business activity. So more or likely yung kanyang uh, likely happening of the event and its consequence as to the efficient and effective conduct of the business activity. Okay. In here, risks which are more likely to occur and have a significant impact on the business will be definitely be the highest priority risk, while those which are more unlikely or have only a low impact will be a much lower priority. Here, risk is usually defined as the possibility that an event will occur, that is, a threat will materialize and adversely affect the achievement of the objectives. No, it is measured in terms of the degree of the likelihood that the event might occur, coupled with the probable impact should the event occur. So, an individual risk may be plotted graphically using a graph, sometimes known as a risk map or matrix, as shown in the next slide. So, ito yung example natin ng risk map or matrix. So, yan. So, you see here, in the x-axis yung likelihood. So, from left to right, if pataas ang pataas yung kanyang likelihood, no, may kita natin, depende ano yung magiging impact also, no. Kung mataas yung kanyang impact from low to high, no, pag pinalat natin yung sum of the risk, no, kunwari siya ay nag-fall under yung risk na may low likelihood and low impact, ang ating pwedeng gawin is to monitor the risk, no. However, kung mataas yung kanyang risk, likelihood of happening pero low naman yung kanyang impact, we are putting emphasis on the control, no, or rather, on the procedure or the activities. On the other opposite side, no, kunwari mababa yung kanyang likelihood pero yung kanyang impact mataas, no, it is better that we terminate or have a contingency plan. So, possible kasi ito yung mga man-made disaster. So, mababa yung likelihood pero mataas yung impact. What we can do is to put contingency plans such as tawag dito yung mga business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, yung example natin. What if medyo hindi maganda yung magiging effect, no, sa conduct ng operations ng company? Better to terminate, no, lalo na kung ang kanyang magiging effect is or yung kanyang ang risk na yung risk appetite natin is much lower than the risk, no. So most likely we would like to terminate the risk, no, or avoid the risk. And if mataas yung kanyang likelihood of happening and mataas yung kanyang impact, no, in here there should be a continuous focus by the top management and the board, no. Baka kasi need i-monitor to. Okay? So later on explain ko yung ibig sabihin natin ng ABCD, no. I-explain ko lang muna. So in here, no, imagine a simple case, no. An organization has a large amount of loose cash. So when you say loose cash, ito yung hindi naka-bundle, no, parang pera lang na hindi naman nakabalandra pero naka-set aside without any hindi siya naka-bound, hindi siya nakalagay sa envelope, no, yung mga tipong ganon. The inherent risk is how much damage would probably be done to the organization if the cash were carelessly left lying around in full view, no, in completely accessible to strangers. So kunwari pakalat-kalat lang, nasa table lang, kung sino-sino pwedeng dumaan yung pwedeng makita. The gross risk is that the risk that the organization is exposed to after taking account of the active and passive controls fortuitously or by design are in place. In practice, when management and staff brainstorm about risk, they usually find it easier to conceptualize about gross risk than about inherent risk, as they naturally factor into their consideration what they know about active and passive controls that are in place. To start the inherent risk portion or position requires answering the question. Imagine we had no active or passive controls at all. What would we judge the scale of the threat to be in terms of likelihood and impact? If we were then to plot the inherent risk on our graph, the figures below or in the figure in the next page suggested the appropriate control approach to concentrate upon in order to mitigate inherent risk most effectively. Okay? So in here, I'll explain yung parang ibig sabihin ng mga A, B, C, D. When you say A, which is the continuous focus by the top management and the board, an inherent risk judged to be within this quadrant is very likely to occur and to have a large impact on the organization. Overlaid upon a judicious application of control approaches, appropriate to the mitigation of inherent risk plotted as being within the other quadrants of the graph. There must be a constant attention to the mitigation of this threat by the top management and review by the board. Okay, so for the letter B, for the terminate or contingency plan, an inherent risk within quadrant D, within this quadrant B, it's not likely to occur but will have a larger impact or large impact on the organization were it to occur. There are alternative control approaches here. The organization may seek to terminate this risk, for instance by having a duplicate data centers in different geographic regions so that the physical disaster or a withdrawal of staff at a one location will enable essential data processing to continue at the other location. Alternatively, or additionally, the organization may develop a test or contingency plan, thereby putting a place that the exceptional measures that will be followed contingent upon the threat materializing. Okay? So for the letter C, so in here, putting emphasis on the control, an inherent risk plotted as being with this quadrant C is one is that is very likely to occur perhaps repeatedly in the absence of measures to mitigate the risk but is unlikely to have a large impact on the organization. An example might be invoicing with incorrect unit prices. Clearly, it is necessary to get these things right first time, and so the organization largely depend on control procedure what cause of cause control activities to achieve this. Okay? So basically yung C natin dito, ito yung common na control common na risk na meron tayo yung the likelihood of happening is high pero yung impact is low. Let's say for example, the risk of erroneously recording some of the transactions lalo kung manual yung ating transactions, no, hindi siya automated, so most likely mataas yung likelihood na mangyari yung event na yon. However, the impact is only low, no. Okay, so ang pwede nating ilagay diyan dito as a risk response is putting emphasis on the control, so that is through the procedures or the activities. Now with the quadrant D, no, a risk in the quadrant D has not been judged not very likely to occur or rather of no great likely significance if it does, no. It is likely to be enough to develop and apply monitoring measures which are largely intended to check that the threat remains within this quadrant, so does not require other mitigation approaches to contain the threat, no, unlike with the B and C, no, kasi we need to tawag dito to contain the threat, no, or the event or the impact of happening, no, or I mean the event to happen, no, as much as possible, no. Monitoring may be a matter of management reviewing exception reports, no, yung mga hindi na process na transactions such as exception reports of software monitoring exceptions and trends over time of the compliance function reviewing process and outturns and so on, no. So kahit simple monitoring lang, no, of kunwari review of some of the exception reports, no, trends over time, no, enough na yon, no, for as response on this type of risk, no, kasi low risk lang naman yan, okay. So the next risk management process, no, we talk about the risk monitoring, no. Once the risk are assigned, no, a probability or impact and sorry for that one, no. Once the risks are assigned a probability or impact and placed in the appropriate position of the chart, no, yung kaninang nakita natin, no, the auditor moves the process to the next step which is called risk monitoring, no. In here, normally, each control assigned in numbers say 1 to 5. 1 is showing the lowest strength and 5 showing the highest strength of a control. Okay. Internal audit assigns this number to each control, and after all the controls are marked with these numbers, then an average is taken by adding all the numbers and dividing them by the number of controls. The number obtained defines the overall strength of the set of controls being examined. Okay? So, in this scenario, no, based on the overall strength of the controls, extent of work is then calculated. So let's see an example here of what we call the risk map, no. So yun yung sinasabi natin, no, we can provide some assignment of the impact of the risk and the probability of risk from 1 to 5, no. And of course, no, through the risk mapping, no, those it will actually depend on the organization, no, kung which of the a mix of the numbers in terms of impact and in the probability will give a low risk, and then a medium risk, and a high risk, no. Of course, with the high risk, most likely pag high risk siya, so yung monitoring natin medyo mas mataas, di ba? As compared with those that are assigned with the low risk, no? Okay? Okay, now we go to the last portion of the risk management process, which we call the risk mitigation and the avoidance. So in here, once risks have been qualified, now the team must determine how to eliminate those risks which have the greatest probability and impact on the business. Okay, so this section actually explains the consideration which must be made and the options available to the management in mitigating and avoiding this risk. Okay, internal auditor shall exercise his or her professional judgment as to how he can eliminate the risk identified during the process. Then after the examination is completed, he or she shall recommend the management in writing to follow certain procedures that shall ensure elimination of the risk. No, kung may nakikita pa siyang mga possibility of the risk na tingin niya mataas, then pwede namang low din, pero in order for them to contain the risk, no, or eliminate or mitigate the risk, pwede siyang mag-recommend, no, si auditor. Okay? So, after discussing the risk management process, no, what are the risk responses, no? Ito yung common, yung lima, no? So, management evaluates appropriate risk responses based on the nature and amount of the risk, which we have already discussed earlier, no? Kung ano yung kanyang probability of happening and its impact, no, to the organization, no? And the first risk response that we can discuss here is the accept, no, risk acceptance, accepting the risk as its current level and take no action to affect its severity, no. Such a response indicates the severity is within the organization risk appetite. So meaning we just accept the risk, meaning after we assess the risk and we consider the controls, no, and the residual risk is now computed, no. What do we do with the residual risk? Do we accept the risk, no? If ever, if the risk is still within the risk appetite, then we can accept the risk. Okay, then we have here the next risk response, what we call um, avoid avoiding the risk, no. Avoiding the risk by divesting or otherwise removing it from the organization risk profile, no. This response indicates the severity may be outside or beyond the organization's risk appetite. So ano na, masyado ng mataas, no, hindi na kaya doon sa risk appetite, no, and there is no cost effective response to bring it within the risk appetite, no. Kung may mga controls na hindi niya kayang maibalik sa risk appetite, or rather parang medyo magastos, no, na wherein the cost is higher than the benefit that we'll be having if ever we are to accept the risk or will be mitigating the risk, no. So better to avoid that kind of risk, no. By the way, yung risk accept is also what we call self insurance, so we just accept the 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 risk, no. Next, risk response, what we call the we pursue the risk or we exploit the risk, no. Because taking on such a risk may be advantageous to the organization and may be necessary to achieve a particular business objective. So it's possible na may mga opportunity na available, no? It's an external environment wherein there is an emerging tawag dito, opportunity that is only readily available to the organization, then we might as well pursue or explain that kind of risk, no? Kasi remember, baka ikaw lang yung pwedeng magkaroon ng ganong exploitation of risk. It will be, of course, a competitive advantage to you, and it will give you a good a good return to you, di ba? Okay? So next would be risk reduction, or we need to reduce the risk through the application of controls or other risk mitigation activities. Such a response indicates that the impact of the risk may go beyond the organization risk appetite, and actions are necessary to reduce the potential impact. So it's possible na the risk appetite may go beyond, pero once we have controls, baka malesen niya malesen niya yung impact ng risk na magiging possible, no, for the organization uh, to go with the risk, no, kasi there is a risk mitigation. Okay? And last risk response, what we call risk share or transfer of the risk, no? Which may include outsourcing, no? Outsourcing of the business function or some of the activities of the organization. It can be also through insurance, no? We share the risk with another party or the insurance provider, or hedging the risk. So it's possible that may mga instrument tayo or investment that we can hedge to another instrument, no, to lessen the unfavorable movement with regard to its reference, no, mga tipong ganun. This option is best when others can manage the risk more effectively and efficiently than the organization can, no. After considering the risk response options, including the cost and benefits of each risk, a risk response is chosen then and will be deployed. Okay, not just by choosing, no. Of course, we need to implement, no, kung ano yung magiging risk response, no. If avoid, just we just remove it. Yun lang yung pwede nating gawin na action after we chose that kind of response. Okay, for reducing, of course, we need to put some controls, no. Possible we can translate it into having a new, or we amend a policy and then we translate it into a procedure. Okay, so mga tipong ganon. Okay, so those are the risk responses. Okay, now we go to the scope of internal audit's role in the risk management. Okay, so in here we have parang a fan, no, wherein we have the green, the yellow, the amber, and the red, no. May mga role minsan ng mga internal audit uh, in terms sa risk management. And kapag green siya, no, indicator siya na it's a core internal audit role in regard to ERM. Now, if it is in the amber, no, it's possible a role na pwedeng gawin ng internal audit pero with safeguards that should be kept in place, no. And kung red siya, these are roles that internal audit should not undertake. It's possible na siya ay assuming management responsibility. So remember that management is responsible, again, for carrying out all the activities of an organization, including the enterprise risk management. In fact, management is responsible, no, for aspects of all the five components of the ERM, which we have discussed earlier. However, these responsibilities will vary, no, depending on the level of in the organization and the organization's characteristics. Note that the Institute of the Internal Auditor standards extend that the internal audit remit beyond providing assurance on risk management processes to an internal audit responsibility to evaluate all sorts of risk exposure facing the organization. No, the implication is that the internal audit must advise the board and the management on the adequacy of the risk management process, and also draw at their attention to significant risks that they may be overlooking or focusing upon inadequately in the estimation of internal audit. There is a range of enterprise risk management activities, some of which may fit into the internal auditors assurance role and others into their consulting role. While of course others are the responsibility of the management and should not be undertaken by the internal audit. So in here, the figures again provides a useful summary of the position. Actually, this diagram was taken from the position statement. No, the role of the internal audit in the enterprise risk, enterprise-wide risk management. No, so in here, the management and the board are responsible, no, for their organization's risk management and control process. Ultimately, the board, no, pero most likely si management talaga yung talagang may responsibility over this two aspect, no. However, internal auditor acting in a consulting role may be asked to assist the organization in identifying, evaluating, implementing risk management methodologies and control to address those risks. So most likely kung nagsisik ng help, no, si management, most likely mga bagong ano to, I mean mga organization na wala pang established na risk management process. Kumbaga they need the help of the expert in terms of this aspect, and usually si internal audit yun. In situations where the organization does not have a formal risk management process, the chief audit executive should formally discuss with the management and the board their obligation to understand, manage, and monitor risk within the organization and the need to satisfy themselves that the processes operating within the organization, even if informal, that provide the appropriate level of visibility into the key risks and how they are being managed and monitored. Also, the CE or the Chief Audit Executive should obtain an understanding of senior management and the board's expectations of the internal audit function in the organization risk management process. No, this understanding should be codified in the internal audit charter or some other formal way. So, in short, no, kung bago-bago ang organization sa risk management, the internal audit activity or department can provide assistance, no, pero in here the CE should be very careful, no, that he or she needs to give some lecture or discussion to the board and the management that they are the ones who are really responsible doon sa risk management activities, no, hindi talaga si internal audit. They can provide assistance but they should not assume any management responsibility. Otherwise, kung hindi di-discuss to ni Chief Audit Executive, na ang assumption dito na yung anong management the board is that the internal audit would assume this kind of activity or the risk management activity, where in fact dapat in the first place hindi, kundi hindi dapat, I mean dapat ang mag assume nito is the management and the board of directors. Ultimately, it is the role of the senior management and the board to determine the role of internal audit in the risk management process. Their view on the internal audit function role is likely to be determined by factors such as the culture of the organization, ability of the internal audit staff, and the local conditions and customs of the country. However, taking on management responsibility regarding the risk management process and the potential threat to the internal audit's functions objectivity requires a full discussion and board approval, lalo na kung talagang walang way, no, para gawin yon. Most likely if talagang need na may gawin ang internal audit with regard to risk management process, no, kung mag-assume siya ng kahit management responsibility, it should be in full discussion and with the board approval, and dapat may safeguard na available. So in here, in summary, no, it is important for the Chief Audit Executive to bring the lack of risk management process to management's attentions along with the suggestions for establishing such a process. If requested, internal auditors can play a proactive role in assisting the initial establishment of a risk management process, no, for the organization. A more proactive role supplements traditional assurance activities with a consultative approach, no, to improving fundamental processes. If such assistance exceeds normal assurance and consulting activities conducted by the internal auditors, objectivity could be impaired. In these situations, no, the internal audit should apply, no, or should comply with the disclosures requirements of the standards. Okay, naintindihan? So most likely itong mga totong green medyo facilitation lang yan or assistance, no? Like reviewing, evaluating, giving assurance, no? Mga core internal audit roles yan. Now, in the amber portion, no, like ito, facilitating, okay pa yan, no? Coaching, okay pa yan. Coordinating, okay pa yan. No, consolidating reports of the risk, pwede pa yan. Maintaining and developing ERM, ito medyo need na ng ano dyan, ng safeguard kasi they are the ones who are developing, no? Lalo na kung championing and developing the risk management strategy for board approval. Now, yung mga red ones, these are not permissible or not allowed, no, na magkaroon ng role C, internal audit, such as setting the risk appetite. Definitely it's the management, no? Imposing risk management process, no? Management assurance on risk, taking decisions, lalo na to, taking decision, this is a management activity, no? Implementing risk response on management's behalf, also a management activity, and accountability of risk management, also part of the management's responsibility over risk management, no? This should not be the role of internal audit, no, na dapat kunin nila in the risk management. Okay? So, what are the control objectivities for risk management process? So, in here, number one, organizational objectives support and align with the organization's mission, no? As much as possible, no, yung ating mga objectives, no, it would come from mainly or stem from the mission. Okay? Number two, significant risks are identified and assessed. So, just like with the objectives that we need to set, no, we need to also consider what are the significant risks that we have identified and assessed so as to formulate the control objectives. Then number three, appropriate risk responses are selected that align the risk within the organization risk appetite. No, if we are to choose the risk response, okay, with regard to the control, with regard to the risk that we have identified, make sure that it is within the organization risk appetite, no? And lastly, no, relevant risk information enabling staff, management, and the board to carry out their responsibilities is captured and communicated in a timely manner across the organization, enabling staff, management, and the board to carry out their responsibilities. Okay, so that are the control objectives for risk management process. Then the last part, no, we'll be talking about the risk management challenges, and we have identified four. Okay, so we end this discussion, no, by these challenges, no, pointing out some of the limitations of risk management as practiced by most of the organizations today. So the number one risk management challenge is that major risks that are concealed. So major risks that organizations are exposed to may not be on the top management's radar screen. So meaning on their visibility. Top management may tend to be focused on achieving their goals to the extent that being blind to the unanticipated consequences of their policies. Major risk in effect may be buried in the woodwork of the organization like a woodworm invisibly weakening the organization. No? It is possible that some staff, even some with the management responsibilities, may not be aware of the problems but do not consider that they are responsible for doing anything about them. A risk-based approach to audit planning should not mean that the internal audit activity only undertakes audit of business processes that are considered to be of high risk. A proportion of internal audit time should be allocated to undertake audits of areas of the business not perceived to represent a significant risk, in case that there are concealed risks in those parts of the organization. Okay? So next risk management challenge is the extra risk of less democratic organization. Hierarchically, organized businesses and those with some or with more of a command culture than a participative culture are less likely to ventilate their problems, no? If staff find that they are penalized for being frank about weaknesses, then they will not be frank. Clearly, the culture of the organization can of itself pose a threat to the organization. So, yun nga, sabi nga natin kanina, doon sa isa sa mga components ng risk, no? Sabi nga natin, just like with internal controls also, kung mataas ang ethical, I mean, if the culture, no, has a high regard, no, with ethics, no, it is possible that they are open for or very open to talk about the weaknesses that they can see or observe in the organization. Otherwise, kung medyo less democratic, meaning parang minsan, bakit para kasalanan ko pa magsabi ako na may mahina sa sistema natin, then that is really a risk management challenge. So that is why there is an emphasis of really having a good tone at the top, no? Kasi kung maganda yung tone at the top, no, most likely they will listen to any um, control weaknesses or control deficiencies, no? Mga tipong ganon. Okay. Next item would be multiple simultaneous risk materializing. So, yung mga sabay-sabay na biglang lumalabas yung realization of the risk, no? When organizations fail or almost fail, it is often because several threats come to fruition at the same time. These threats may or may not be independent of each other. In most organizations, risk management is inadequate to identify and assess the risk of multiple simultaneous failures. The techniques of risk management, including those discussed in this topic, no, would become too complex to use, no, understand and rely upon if they were adopted to accommodate the risk of multiple simultaneous failures, no. But the human mind can almost to can almost intuitively process the complexity of such scenarios quite well. Every organization should consider what risk they face that more than one untoward event might happen at the same time. What those events might be and whether the organization has put in place what will be needed to manage a way through the multiple crises should this occur. So it's more of really I mean, it will still under ano ba um underlie, no, doon sa preparation or preparedness of the organization in anticipating the risk. So kung mataas ang kanilang maganda kanilang risk management process, so most likely kahit pa man sabay-sabay yung paglabasan ng risk, no, or pag-materialize or pag-realize ng risk, eventually kayang i-manage dapat yun ng ano ng RM process. Okay? Okay, another RM challenge is opportunities as well as threats, no. We should note that the discussion of risk management has been in the context of threats to the business which must be identified, assessed, and responded to. We should not overlook that the tools of risk management can and should be applied to opportunities as well as to the threats. Organizations should seek to identify what might happen in the future which could offer an opportunity to an organization if that organization was positioned to exploit that opportunity at that time, notwithstanding that it might not be within the organization's business plan. Consideration should also be given to advanced development of the capability to exploit such an opportunity should it occur, and the opportunity missed can be interpreted as a threat that has not been avoided. No, parang yun yung problem natin, no, kung may mga opportunities na hindi na-exploit along the way, no, kapag hindi natin kinuha yon, pwede ring makita or pwedeng ma-interpret yon na parang threat that has not been avoided, no. Yung ibig sabihin natin dito sa number 4, that is opportunities as well as threats, no. Okay, number 5, too risk averse, no. When you say too risk averse, medyo ingat na ingat tayo in terms of managing the risk, no. Finally, we should not be too risk averse. Profit is the reward for taking the risk. So remember the saying, the higher the return, the higher the risk, the higher the return. And of course, kung lower yung risk, lower din yung return, no? Peter Drucker said that the main goal of the management science must be enable the business to take the right risk. Indeed, it must be enable business to take greater risk by providing knowledge and understanding of alternative risk and alternative expectations, by identifying the resources and efforts needed for the desired results, by mobilizing energies for contribution, and by measuring results against expectations. thereby providing means for early correction of wrong or inadequate decisions. All this may sound mere quibbling over terms, yet the terminology of risk minimization does induce a hostility to risk taking and risk making. That is to business enterprise. Okay, so in here, COSO takes a more cautious view. No entity operates in a risk-free environment. That is very true. No, lahat naman talaga tayo, kahit tayo, di lang tao, we are actually living in a very risky world, right? So in here, an enterprise risk management does not seek to move towards such an environment. No, hindi naman talaga pwede natin sabihin na may absolute risk-free environment, and yung ERM hindi naman ganun yung kanyang direction. Rather, the ERM enables the management to operate more effectively in an environment filled with risk by doing the approaches such as identifying, assessing, and giving responses to the risk. No, even the safest industry, let's say for example the government, meron pa ring risk na meron dyan. No, I mean, risk in terms of yung funding source fund, I mean funding of cash, no? Kasi may nandiyan naman yung BIR. Most likely mapo-fund naman lahat nila yung mga expenses nila, 'di ba? So, even government has this risk, no? Medyo obvious naman yung iba, no? Pero kahit even the an industry with the lowest risk na pwedeng ma-assess, meron pa rin at meron pa ring risk yan. Okay. So with that all, thank you class for attending or listening to my lecture about internal controls and risk management. Okay. So thank you.